All the other members of the household were opposed to the introduction of a strange boy, although he was in fact very vindictive. And to Heathcliff's sorrow, he felt as though she had moved beyond him. Emily Jane Brontë was an English novelist and poet who is best known for her only novel, Wuthering Heights, now considered a classic of English literature.
Now, let's get started.
In around 1760, a gentleman farmer named Earnshaw went from his farm, Wuthering Heights, to Liverpool on a business trip. He found there a little boy who looked like a gypsy who had apparently been abandoned on the streets, and brought the child home with him, to join his own family of his wife. His son Hindley, his daughter Catherine, a manservant named Joseph, and Ellen, who was working as a maid. Earnshaw named the boy Heathcliff after a son of his who had died. All the other members of the household were opposed to the introduction of a strange boy, except for Catherine, who was a little younger than Heathcliff and became fast friends with him. Hindley in particular felt as though Heathcliff had supplanted him, although he was several years older and the true son and heir. Hindley bullied Heathcliff when he could, and Heathcliff used his influence over Earnshaw to get his way. Heathcliff was a strange, silent boy, who appeared not to mind the blows he received from Hindley, although he was in fact very vindictive. Earnshaw and his wife died. Catherine and Heathcliff were very grieved, but consoled each other with thoughts of heaven. Hindley was now around 20 years old. Heathcliff was about 12 and Catherine was 11. Hindley was married to a young woman named Frances. Hindley used his new power as the head of the household to reduce Heathcliff to the level of a servant, although Heathcliff and Catherine continued their intimacy. Catherine taught Heathcliff her lessons and would join him in the fields, or they would run away to the moors all day to play, never minding their punishments afterward. One day they ran down to the Thrushcross Grange, a more civilized house where the Lintons lived with their children Edgar, 13, and Isabella, 11. Catherine and Heathcliff despised the spoiled, delicate Linton children. When the Lintons found out that the girl was Miss Earnshaw, they took good care of her and threw Heathcliff out. Catherine stayed at the Grange for 5 weeks, and came home dressed and acting like a proper young lady, to the delight of Hindley and his wife. And to Heathcliff's sorrow, he felt as though she had moved beyond him. Over the next few years, Catherine struggled to both maintain her relationship with Heathcliff, and socialize with the elegant Linton children. Frances gave birth to a son, Hareton, and died soon after of tuberculosis. Hindley gave in to wild despair and alcoholism, and the household fell into chaos. Heathcliff was harshly treated, and came to hate Hindley more and more. Edgar Linton fell in love with Catherine, who was attracted by his wealth and genteel manners, although she loved Heathcliff much more seriously. However, Edgar and Catherine became engaged, and Heathcliff ran away. Catherine fell ill after looking for Heathcliff all night in a storm, and went to the Grange to get better. After the Linton parents died, Edgar and Catherine were married. They lived fairly harmoniously together for almost a year, then Heathcliff returned. He had mysteriously acquired gentlemanly manners, education, and some money. Catherine was overjoyed to see him, Edgar considerably less so. Heathcliff stayed at Wuthering Heights, where he gradually gained financial control by paying Hindley's gambling debts. Heathcliff's relationship with the Linton household became more and more strained as Edgar grew extremely unhappy with Heathcliff's relationship with Catherine. Finally there was a violent quarrel. Heathcliff left the Thrushcross Grange to avoid being thrown out by Edgar's servants. Catherine was angry at both of the men, and Edgar was furious at Heathcliff and displeased by his wife's behavior. Catherine shut herself in her room for several days. In the meantime, Heathcliff eloped with Isabella by way of revenge on Edgar. Isabella was struck by his romantic appearance. Catherine became extremely ill, feverish and delirious, and nearly died, though she was carefully tended by Edgar once he discovered her condition. A few months later, Catherine was still very delicate and looked as though she would probably die. She was pregnant. Isabella, who had married Heathcliff, wrote to Ellen describing how brutally she was mistreated by her savage husband, and how much she regretted her marriage. Ellen went to visit them to see if she could improve Isabella's situation. She told them about Catherine's condition, and Heathcliff asked to see her. A few days later, Heathcliff came to the Thrushcross Grange while Edgar was at church. He had a passionate reunion with Catherine, in which they forgave each other as much as possible for their mutual betrayals. Catherine fainted, Edgar returned, and Heathcliff left. Catherine died that night after giving birth to a daughter. Edgar was terribly grieved and Heathcliff wildly so. He begged Catherine's ghost to haunt him. After Catherine died, the feud between Hindley and Heathcliff reached a boiling point. Hindley tried to murder Heathcliff, but Heathcliff almost murdered him instead. Hindley died a few months after his sister Catherine. Isabella escaped from Wuthering Heights and went to live close to London, where she gave birth to a son, Linton. Catherine and Edgar's daughter, Cathy, grew to be a beloved and charming child. She was brought up entirely within the confines of the Grange, and was entirely unaware of the existence of Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff, or her cousin Hareton there. Once she found the farmhouse while exploring the moors, and was upset to think that such an ignorant rustic as Hareton could be related to her. Hareton's father was Hindley, whose sister was her mother Kathleen. Ellen ordered her not to return there and explained about Heathcliff's feud with Cathy's father, Edgar. Isabella died when Linton was about 12 years old, and Edgar went to fetch him to the Grange. Linton was a peevish and effeminate boy, but Cathy was pleased to have a playmate. That very day, however, Heathcliff sent Joseph to fetch his son Linton to Wuthering Heights, and when Cathy woke up the next morning her cousin was gone. Though sad at first, she soon got over it, and continued her happy childhood. On her 16th birthday, Cathy and Ellen strayed onto Heathcliff's lands, and he invited them into Wuthering Heights to see Linton. Cathy was pleased to renew her acquaintance, and Heathcliff was eager to promote a romance between the two cousins, so as to ensure himself of Edgar's land when he died. When they returned home, Edgar forbade Cathy to continue visiting Wuthering Heights, and said that Heathcliff was an evil man. Cathy then began a secret correspondence with Linton, which became an exchange of love letters. Actually, Heathcliff manipulated Linton to write it. Ellen found out and put an end to it. One day Edgar became ill. Heathcliff asked Cathy to return to Wuthering Heights because Linton was breaking his heart for her. She did so, and found Linton to be a bullying invalid, but not without charm. Ellen fell ill as well and was unable to prevent Cathy from visiting Wuthering Heights every day. Cathy felt obliged to help Linton, and despised Hareton for being clumsy and illiterate. Linton was increasingly ill, and seemed to be terrified of something. As it turned out, his father was forcing him to court Cathy. Heathcliff feared Linton would die before Edgar did, so eventually he all but kidnapped Cathy and Ellen, and told them Cathy couldn't go home to see her dying father until she married Linton. Cathy did marry Linton, and escaped in time to see Edgar before he died. Edgar was buried next to his wife. After Edgar's funeral, Heathcliff fetched Cathy to Wuthering Heights to take care of Linton, who was dying. Heathcliff told Ellen that he was still obsessed by his beloved Catherine, and had gone to gaze at her long-dead body when her coffin was uncovered by the digging of Edgar's grave. Cathy had to care for Linton alone, and when he died, she maintained an unfriendly attitude to the household. Heathcliff, Hareton, Joseph, and Zillah, the housekeeper. Hareton was in love with her. As time passed, however, she became lonely enough to seek Hareton's company, and began teaching him to read. Heathcliff felt that Hareton looked like him as a strange and silent boy. The friendly relationship between Cathy and Hareton reminded him the time when he had enjoyed with Catherine. Heathcliff began to act more and more strangely, and became incapable of concentrating on the world around him, as though Catherine's ghost wouldn't let him. He all but stopped eating and sleeping, and Ellen found him dead one morning, with a savage smile on his face. He was buried next to Catherine, as he had wished. But the two souls were not at rest. Instead, there were rumors and reports of two wandering ghosts traipsing around the moorland. Hareton grieved for him, but was too happy with the younger Cathy to be inconsolable. Hareton and Cathy planned to marry and moved to the Thrushcross Grange.
Please subscribe to my channel. We're gonna show you world masterpieces in about 15 minutes with manga. Manga is Japanese-style comics that is easy for everyone to understand. We're sure that you can grasp the context shortly.
See you next time.